Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Peter Rutzler. The cold has blown in again, but Ligue 1 is always here to keep you warm. But who froze under the snowy, wintry conditions, and who was making snow angels? All that and more after the latest headlines. Monaco continued their impressive form as they came from a goal down to beat Lille 2-1. Stefan Jovetic and Ronnie Lopez helped the Monegasques strengthen their position in second place while condemning Christophe Galtier's side to the relegation zone. On Saturday, Rennes grabbed two second-half goals to win at Bordeaux. Benoit Costil gifted his old side the opener before ex-Girondin star Yoann Gourcuff netted to seal the victory. In the multiplex, the two relegation nail-biters ended in draws. Amiens and Troyes traded penalties in their 1-1 affair as Strasbourg knocked back Toulouse 2-2. Dijon saw a Wesley Saïd double get them a point in a 2-2 draw at Montpellier, while Angers were vindicated for resting players midweek against Paris Saint-Germain as they thumped Caen 3-0. On Sunday, Nice almost caused an upset but were eventually beaten 2-1 by leaders PSG. Dani Alves scored in the second half to win it, but the home side had numerous chances in an entertaining affair. Elsewhere, Nantes stuttered in their chase for Europe as they drew 1-1 at Metz, while Saint-Etienne heaped more misery on Guingamp, who have won once in their last 12 as they won 2-0. In the final game of the weekend, Memphis Depay did it again as his late winner saw Lyon silence the Stade Velodrome with a 3-2 win. Kostas Mitroglou thought he'd earned Marseille a point late on before the Dutchman strike, with a scuffle in a tunnel also taking the headlines after the match. In off-the-field news, both of the Olympique sides are in hot water with UEFA for not controlling their fans during their recent Europa League clashes. Fireworks and aggression being the governing body's main source of concern, as well as Legon reportedly showing racist behaviour, which could also land them in more hot trouble, as they have been suspended from punishment, had a suspended punishment back in 2017 in the last quarterfinals for not controlling their fans. And that's all for now. But for all the latest news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with that Olympique derby game, and it was another cracker between the top four in Ligue 1. Both sides playing end-to-end football, and eventually Lyon squeezing past Marseille 3-2, and a wonderful silence really that came over the stadium when Lyon ever scored without having the away fans obviously rich, but a really solid performance for them, and in honesty, a really big win for Bruno Genesio because it keeps him in the hot seat for now at least, and it also puts Lyon right back on the tail of Marseille for that chase for that third Champions League spot.
Absolutely, it was a really, really big win for Lyon. I wasn't sure that they were going to have it in them. Countering that, of course, Marseille seemed to consistently find it troublesome to beat those teams in the top four. But it was a very impressive showing from Lyon. It was another game where Marseille's bigger name players, I think, really failed to turn up. I have been praising Florian Thauvin, especially of late, but this was one of his most anonymous performances of the season. You know, this was the Thauvin of a couple of years ago. So it's disappointing to see that he's really struggling to up his game when it really, really matters in these big games. But I think the huge credit does have to go to Lyon. It was a fantastic atmosphere. I think the Guardian piece today touches on it. This match is now getting to perhaps the fiercest of derbies in France at the moment. You know, it genuinely feels like there's some hatred between the sides, which, providing it's within reason, it's what you want from a big derby match like this. And you know, the atmosphere was incredible. It was a pretty full Stade Velodrome We know how intimidating the Marseille fans can be. We've seen it in previous Olympicos against Lyon, and the effigies of Valbuena and the like. So it would have been difficult, I think, for Lyon. They're in pretty dire form of late. So to come away with all 3 points, especially having conceded that Mitroglou equaliser so late on, I think showed some real spirit. It's a useful 3 points for Genesio. I still don't think it necessarily changes what I think will happen in the summer with a change of coach, but it certainly perhaps gives them a little bit of a stay of execution until the end of the season. We're now on for a real nail biting running. There's only 2 points separating them. 7 or 8 games left. Not too many difficult games for either side, so it's going to be really interesting to see which of these 2 teams cracks first.
Absolutely, and I saw an excellent point made by our very own Eric Devin, who's done a little bit of research into this Champions League place. Because if, for say, in the Europa League, obviously there is a place that automatically goes to the Champions League, but if someone like Atletico or Lazio as well, teams that would, at the moment at least, qualify automatically for the Champions League group stages in their leagues, that automatic place that usually goes to the Europa League winner would go to the 5th league and their 3rd place team, which currently is Liga and would be one of those sides. So there's an incentive there that should someone like the favourites Atletico win the Europa League, if it's not Marseille themselves, that position is even more valuable than it is at the moment being a qualifying round for them. But Peter, let's focus on Lyon really to start off with, because it's a really big win for them given their recent form. Obviously they did win the previous weekend that finally snapped that 6-game winless streak in the league, but this again, although we mentioned it earlier against Paris Saint-Germain when they beat them, this feels like a big win that could finally give them momentum in this season and has them breathing down Marseille's neck now.
Yeah, this was very much a seesaw game, I think, for Lyon, because it was that sense of it could go either way. I mean, obviously in recent weeks we've been very, very critical of Genesio and the way his side's played, especially when Lyon were at their finest and cutting teams aside and scoring goals for fun. They were, favourites for second, let alone just top 3. But I think this game really, Lyon had to perform. After the real disappointment against CSKA Moscow last week, I think Lyon would have seen the Europa League as a competition they could go on and win. I think there's real disappointment from the way they played against Ajax in the semi-final last year. Obviously, there was the incentive of the final, and to lose it the way they did after getting such a good result in Moscow, to lose 3-2, and then there were also the scenes of Fernando Marçal, almost having a scuffle with Genesio. It just, all the messages were really, really negative, and then obviously it came out during the game last night that Canal Plus were claiming that he'd handed in his resignation had Genesio, and which was denied. But all of that was culminating onto this huge game at the Velodrome in that intense atmosphere, as Rich was saying, and they had to perform, and they did. And it's one of the criticisms we leveled at Lyon was perhaps it's a bit of inexperience. We're aware that they're a young team, and that obviously plays a part. And of course, Genesio with his inability to form a plan B, but it felt like his team took control of the game. And I think the actual focus itself can't really praise Genesio too much. I don't think Lyon adapted how they approached the game. They were far more balanced and controlled and more conservative for sure. But I feel like it was more Garcia's selection that perhaps we could be more critical of. I mean, Ocampos has been in good form, but and Lopez as well has looked bright. But in a game like this where they had that potential to be so fierce, and it felt like Lyon dominated the centre of midfield. And obviously Houssem Aouar was outstanding. He really showed his potential. His touch was excellent. His distribution superb, and obviously he scored a really well taken goal. And Ndombele again stepping up to the mark in a big game, really dominating midfield, using his power, his strength, but also his technical ability too. And Toussard, a player who Lyon seem to really rely on, and when he performs, they do too, and sort of the metronome in that of the triumvirate in midfield. And he performed well as well. And I think that was a real boost for them. I still think there are big questions to be asked of their front three still. I think it was written in L'Equipe. They were highlighting again the lack of interconnectivity, a similar problem we've seen with PSG. Obviously, Mariano is a goal hungry poacher, Van Nistelrooy-esque in his desires to get goals and instead of contributing to team play. But it's that this kind of result is the result they need to catapult themselves back into that top three pursuit and really push Marseille. As Rich was saying, I don't think that this will be a catalyst to Genesio suddenly staying on. I think we've seen a lot that shows he's quite limited, and with the talent pool that they've got at the moment, Lyon, and the talent pool they will expand with, and the young players they've got in their academy, it feels like they need the right sort of manager to really guide these players and push them on. You have to look at Leonardo Jardim and what he's doing with Monaco, and Monaco's squad is very good. I wouldn't say it's that much better than Lyon's, but the way he stabilised a side that suffered real ruptures last summer speaks volumes of just how good Jardim is, and he, for me, is leaps and bounds ahead of the likes of Genesio and as the best manager in Liga. So I think that will count against him, but if Lyon suddenly turn it back on and we see the very best, he'll give himself a shout of keeping the job. But a huge win for Lyon, absolutely.
Yeah, almost undeniable, really, Rich. But I do want to focus on that midfield duo that you did mention there, Peter. They've sort of drifted, all three of them, in fact, really, in these 6 games instead of when we focused on the trio up front and the mixed match that they've had and bits like that, and Depay's redeemed himself to a degree with a goal, but not entirely, let's say, to be fair, because it has been a frustrating time with all of them, really, especially with Fekir out. But those three in midfield, Rich, it's been one of those moments where they haven't quite stepped up to the mark in that 6-game run where they didn't win a game, and they weren't great at the win that they did have. But finally, again, in these big games, all three of them, in fact, turned up. And first of all, Houssem Aouar has had to pull out of the under-21 squad earlier because of illness, and he was ill all week, which kind of puts more of a statement on how fantastic he really was on Sunday, doesn't it?
It does. I think one thing we have to remember is this is Toussaint played a decent-ish number of games last season, but this really is all three players' breakthrough season still, and they have been relied on to an incredible level. I think. I don't think many teams would. They're undoubtedly a hugely talented trio, but the level of reliance that's been sort of thrust upon them by Lyon to play week in, week out, learn on the job, is testament to just how good I think they actually are. So I think it's understandable that all three of them are going to go through, especially as we come towards the end of the season, a little drop in form, a little drop in energy. And Toussaint especially has looked very tired of late. The volume of work that he is being required to do, I think it's only natural in what is in effect your full debut season. I think we have to remember that. I think we also have to remember these are, for my mind anyway, the future of the French midfield. I think you can make a very strong case that in, 4 or 5 years' time, these three are lining up as the midfield trio for the national team. That's how good a set of players they are. Between the three of them, they just cover everything that you need. You've got the sort of calm, as Peter mentioned, the sort of metronome that Toussaint is. You've got the drive, the energy, the power that Ndombele brings, and then you've got the slightly more artistic nature, I suppose, that Aouar brings. And we saw with his goal last night just how good he can be in and around the penalty area. So they're a fantastic trio between them. In an ideal world, I think Genesio and Olas would both admit it would be nice if they perhaps got a bit more depth in that midfield so that they could have given some of these midfielders a rest. I think the reliance on them so much throughout the season, it's no coincidence that they've had such a dramatic blip in the last sort of 6 weeks or so. If that squad was a little bigger, if that squad was a little better, some of those players could have been rested. And maybe they wouldn't be 2 points behind. Maybe they wouldn't have gone into this game needing absolutely essential 3 points against Marseille. So I'm very excited to what the future holds for all three, because they are just all completely different, yet together just complement each other superbly.
I think that's sometimes the thing we forget. Both of those is that one, there's not a great deal of depth in the Lyon squad, so a lot of them had played a lot of time, and they've sort of mixed and matched at the same time with little niggles, and obviously fitting the front four in has affected that as well. But terrific to see them again dominant in a big game, which is exactly what you want to see. But for Marseille, Peter, those questions start rising again. I mean, they've played all three of the top sides now on 2 occasions, and they haven't won any of them really, and that is probably still the knock on this Champions project that they, at least for this season, won't be able to shake.
Yeah, for sure. The stats wheeled out, isn't it? I mean, it's 2 points, isn't it, I think, this season from the 6 games against the top 3, and you've also got the fact that they haven't beaten any of them since, well, for 18 matches in total in 2016. So that's sort of the shadow that, you know, is looming large over their shoulders, and that's the difference between, you know, a side that's going to go on and get that top 3 spot comfortably, your likes of Monaco, and a side that, you know, is under pressure. But I think, again, whereas Lyon, it's a case of young players breaking through, as Rich outlined, and you've got that sort of breakthrough feel. With Marseille, it's that cobbled feel that we, you know, it's still there. I think a lot of it has been carefully molded by Garcia, and he's lent on the elements that have really shone. And we've seen that with Thauvin, and we've seen that with Mandanda. Again, was really relied on of the free that I think, Rich, you mentioned it a few pods ago about this free of Gustavo, Mandanda, and Thauvin. And it's very much the case, and you need all three to be relatively on song. And when you're relying on those players, it does create this sense that, you know, there is vulnerabilities here. And Florian Thauvin, of course, symbolises that. We haven't really seen him perform in a big game. Again, he was anonymous last night, and those are the moments you want your best players to really stand out and grab the games by the scruff of the neck. And if you compare him to Fekir, of course, he's out with a knee injury at the moment, but Fekir definitely stands up in these big games. In fact, he's amplified. And Marseille need that. I mean, we saw that earlier in the season when PSG came to the Velodrome with Luis Gustavo, who was outstanding. Mandanda, of course, an exception to the rule, another superb display. And, you know, Lyon could have been run out much more comfortable winners if it wasn't for him. He pulled off some superb stops. So, but you need your big players to play, and you need those players to be more spread out throughout the side. There are some, you know, vulnerabilities in there. I think starting a Campos for me was one. I mean, he has scored a couple of goals lately, but I don't really know what he adds in terms of in a creative sense. He's quite a frustrating player to watch. I mean, he looks like he's got ability, but then he'll muck something up, or in a way that you just think, well, this completely belies what you've just done a few moments ago, and he's still not got that next level. I mean, his recent form aside, you look at the broader picture and you think, really? And obviously, Sanson is the man who's been in and out of the side, and we've questioned frequently why that's been the case. I mean, Garcia doesn't seem to fully trust him, and I mean, he too has the potential to become anonymous in games, and that's a trait that you probably want to mask, but you want to look elsewhere too. So the likes of Payet, you want to be pushing on, you want him to be grabbing the games by the scruff of the neck. And admittedly, of late, we've seen better from Payet. I actually think he was okay last night. His crossing was better. We're used to watching Marseille, and it's just a constant barrage of Payet corners being overhit and undercooked, and then free kicks the same, and then one might look nice and it's fine. But there's that lack of consistency, I think, where all of the elements come together. And when we have seen that this season, Marseille have been superb. So I think that's the real challenge for Garcia. But again, going back to that first point about this cobbled together feel, that, you know, that there is that, you need all, there's something missing still. I think defensively there is vulnerabilities. Rami and Rolando have been good, but, you know, put a bit of pace there and they're in trouble. But, you know, I think with Garcia in charge, as much as I can criticize the way he set them up, I don't think Lopez should have partnered Gustavo. He wasn't awful, but he was, again, there were a couple of times where I was looking up during the game because I joined the game late, and I was thinking, well, who's partnering Gustavo in midfield? I haven't seen him. I was thinking, is it Lopez? That looks like Lopez. and that's not what you want in midfield, and that just shows how dominant Lyon were. But again, that's a selection decision, I feel, from Garcia, who generally this season has done well. So maybe it's a blip, but those big games, those are the ones you want to be challenging. You want to win these games to pick up points, because it makes a statement, and it makes other sides, the lesser sides, believe, okay, actually, they are a top 3 club. But if they can't beat them, then it undermines their challenge, certainly. So elements missing, but I think, yeah, certainly they'll want to improve their record, especially against the bigger clubs.
Well, I after the game last night, I dusted off a tweet from just before the opening of the January transfer window. I was talking to a couple of Marseille fans, and I was saying, there's a big opportunity here to get that second place. Monaco hadn't quite kick-started this latest sort of run of very good form. Marseille were up there; they were a lot closer to Monaco. And I just we were talking about the transfer window, and I said, well, get a right back, get 2 centre backs, get a striker. It's 4 players. You signed 4 players in the January transfer window the previous year. 4 players that would get you. I'm fairly certain if they'd have gone out and recruited in those 4 areas properly, and I don't count Mitroglou as a proper striking signing, I'm fairly certain they'd certainly be challenging Monaco a lot more harder than they are doing at the minute, and may have even actually, they may have even been close to getting a second place more or less sewn up, because they have, Thauvin is playing very well, albeit can't seem to get into the bigger games. Gustavo has proved an excellent signing. Sanson, when he is still a little bit hit and miss, but when he's a hit, he's very, very good. So if they'd have been a bit more sensible in their January recruitment, they wouldn't be having to worry about looking at Lyon over their back. They'd be thinking, we've got Monaco firmly in our sights. If not, they're just behind them. I've said this numerous times about them. I just feel sometimes this could have been a bit of a missed opportunity for Marseille this season.
Yeah, it might just maybe also be a bridge too far for this season, really. Maybe the players... That's what I think maybe in January, or at least I hope it was the decision. Maybe the players that they really wanted, that would have really added the quality to their squad and the depth, just weren't available. That's the hope, you think, and that restock in the summer, a great chance to bring in some players that will sort of make them a better outfit overall. Like you say, a right back will be clearly something that they look at, some extra bodies in midfield as well. Definitely a striker that can get them 20 a season as well if they can. That kind of thing will make them a much better team. But I do want to talk about the scuffle really that ended the game. Peter, Marcelo obviously sort of taunted the fans with his shirt at the end. That was seen as the instigator, really. It was sort of on the pitch with Rami as well. Him and the two had a little bit of a I can't really call it a fight, really. You can never call these things fights in football, really. We don't get a real... Well, unless you saw the one in League 2 the other day. That's more of a fight. This was more of a tough talking to between 2 players, but a little bit unsavoury at the end, but it adds to the spice of a feisty game, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's good for... I guess it's... the flip side is it's good for the spectacle, but yeah, as you said, it was more of a congregation of bodies coming together at the mouth of the tunnel. Obviously, it had been sparked by clearly some exchange between Marcelo and Adil Rami, where Rami's lashed out, and I'm sure he'll face retrospective action for that. It wasn't seen by the referee, and then of course Marcelo raises his shirt, and then everyone starts flying in. Rami hangs about as well, and everyone's getting involved, it seems like everyone's trying to keep each other out of the fight without actually knowing who's actually in the fight. But clearly words are exchanged. You've got Thauvin coming out going all Corleone, saying they will pay for it. So, it's good for the spectacle. And it does add to this sense of just how deep and intense the rivalry is becoming. And that's symptomatic both of the competition and of course, of the games themselves. They just keep adding spice to it each time they play. And, that makes it for a good spectacle as much as anything. And as long as it's, we don't want to breach... we don't want loss of control of players, which I'm sure is the normal charge. But it shows passion, I think, for one thing. It shows it for the players that, it did mean something. I think that's one thing that could have been questioned about Lyon when we were talking about the Marcel Was there some kind of disunity? But it can galvanise that a little bit. But a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, and that was expressed in those unsavoury scenes.
Yeah, and some more unsavoury things for both the teams off the pitch, which, as we mentioned in the news, that both are being very seriously looked at by UEFA for not controlling fans in the other game, and Lyon obviously having a possibly even bigger issue where they might even close the stadium for several games, given that they have a suspended sentence from last season as well. Again, it's a shame that fans in France in these European games, for these big clubs really, and you don't really see it as much in England or in Italy, or really in Spain, especially for the very big clubs, at least anyway. This is something that the clubs need to stamp very hard on at the moment. This can't happen again.
No, it can't. I mean, we want to see passionate fans. We want to see passionate fans both inside and outside the stadium. It's good to see fans up for a game as they head towards the stadium. We like that. We obviously then, it is that fine line. We then don't want to see trouble. We don't want to see fighting. We don't want to see bars getting smashed up. We don't want to see the police in the stadium getting pelted with objects. We don't want to see players getting pelted with objects. But so that obviously has to be controlled, and there can be a zero tolerance on that. But they just need to be careful they don't go too far and sort of police the sort of passion out of the game. There's always this image that the French league is sort of the lowest in terms of average attendances and things like that. So it's important that these stadiums can still retain an atmosphere. We've still got a decent number. You look at Strasbourg, you look at Marseille, Lyon at home, Saint-Etienne at home. They can all generate a really, really good atmosphere. So we want to be careful that we're not taking that away from it. But you're right, there has been far too many instances of late. To be honest, it's not even of late. You can trace some of these instances back to 4 or 5 years ago. Probably reached its absolute peak in terms of really, really bad levels with obviously the Bastia Lyon game last season, season before, with the Bastia fans entering the pitch before kickoff to attack the Lyon players. There has to be a better level of policing, but it also has to be a sensible level of policing, because we need safe players, we need safe fans, we need safe general public. But we also need to have passionate fans. We need to have, real fiery atmospheres. We really don't want to lose that. We saw last night with the Velodrome crowd. We want that. We want that in every game, that kind of atmosphere, that kind of passion. And you just have to be careful that doesn't get policed out. But you're right, it does need to be policed properly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's levels to it, I think, is the best way to put it, isn't it? It seems like in French football at the moment as well, over the last couple of years, there's been too frequently incidences sort of popping up everywhere, and Lyon had the one last season, wasn't it, where their fans were on the pitch as well and causing a big ruckus, and to a point where they stopped the game briefly as well. So there needs to be something done there really, and something stronger sort of punishment, and that might come from UEFA, unfortunately for them at least. And on to another interesting game that we saw on Sunday, the sort of earlier game, sort of for the marketing reasons at least anyway, for the midday kickoff, 1 o'clock at French time at least anyway, but midweek for us, between Nice and Paris Saint-Germain. And it was a really entertaining affair, with Nice taking a good lead. They had a number of good chances, but Paris Saint-Germain do what Paris Saint-Germain seem to always do in French football at the moment, and that's still win anyway. But Peter, Nice gave them a right good scare and gave a really good performance again.
Yeah, there's still life in Lucien Favre's side yet, it seems. They've had a really up and down season, which we've mentioned. We were talking about them last week, but in this game, they really showcased some of the attacking verve that we've missed a little bit this season, and I think that's helped by the lineup they were able to field. I think of late they had a little blip in form, a number of injuries and absentees. It was pretty much a full strength Nice side, actually, looking at it. I mean, Cyprien was back, looking good. Seri getting on the ball in a way that we haven't seen him do before. There were some passages of play were outstanding. I think there was one doing the rounds on Twitter where they just kept they broke the PSG's press, and it looks fantastic. The speed of retention of the ball, the way they're moving it across from midfield going forward. And, I think there are elements to this Nice side that look like, again, we can talk about reconstruction of sides, but of one that is solid. But we also saw in the game the things that have held them back. Defensively, there are still a lot of questions to be asked. Malang Sarr is prone to some errors, but it's Dante for me who really has gone off a cliff this season. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but his standards have dropped dramatically. And of course, at the start of the season, it was all about Johan Cardinal in goal, and Benitez has come in and done okay. He's established himself well, but I think the two of them will feel disappointed with the first goal. And as Favre was saying, the second goal again is avoidable, with player leaving Dani Alves to run on and score. So there is that twofold balance of their season that we really saw. But obviously last week was all about Alassane Player, wasn't it, with his 4 goals? But this week it was about Balotelli again, bringing him back, and you could see again why he's so important. I think on a different day, Balotelli scores a couple of goals, even a hat-trick. He was really unlucky with that header in the second half that cracked against the crossbar. And I think I'd be surprised if he doesn't think about moving in the summer. I mean, obviously Nice are looking at getting back into Europe, but I think he'll feel that he's got another crack at an elite level side. And I wouldn't hold it against him. I feel like this season at times he has carried Nice in some of the darker times, but at the same time they last week sort of hinted at maybe they're good without him. But I genuinely feel that he's been at their best player, and I think maybe he'll look at that and think, can I do it again on a bigger stage? Potentially. You'll have to test him again, but I would back him to do that. But I think Nice were really, really good in this game. And there are some promising options, certainly. And it's nice to see Seri playing well. It's nice to see Cyprien playing well. And Sam Maximan, who's been talked up a lot, especially by Balotelli. And he scored again. And I mean, if he seems like he's got all the tools to be really, really good. He's a real rough diamond of a player. I remember the Under-20 World Cup for France. He was absolutely outstanding and extremely audacious. And it's all about curving that and moulding that and turning that into a ruthless, efficient, elite level player. And there's certainly elements there that can really push on. And Favre's certainly a manager that can do it. And I think he's proved it as well with the way that Nice have responded. And who knows, they could get top 5, but I'm sure Rich's Rennes will have a say in that too.
I just wanted to just quickly to touch on Balotelli as well. I think one thing that we saw probably clear as anything in that game was just how his maturity has improved. It was very, very clear that between Silva, between Kimpembe, between Alves, they were out for getting him sent off. They were, goading him. They were going down at the slightest touches. They were clearly trying to wind him up. And the old Balotelli would have fallen for that. He would have kicked out. He would have thrown an elbow. But he actually lapped it up, I thought, on Sunday. I thought you could see that he knew that. He knew that they were trying to wind him up. And he looked in control. He was able to be that sort of muscular, powerful, physical player he can be. And be really strong in those challenges. Be on the edge, which is fine. But the old Balotelli would have gone over the edge. And he would have got sent off in that game. So I was very, very impressed with that level of maturity in the face of, in Silva and Alves especially, 2 veterans who probably know better, more than any other players in world football, how to really get at a player and niggle at his weaknesses. So real full credit to Balotelli. And also then, interesting thing I read the other day was that obviously his contract expires in the summer, but it seems that River, the Nice president, has negotiated with Balotelli and his agent. Which one is that? Mino, isn't it? Negotiated in there that yes, he can leave, but they will be getting a 10 million euro fee. So although his contract will have expired, they're still going to be getting money for him. And Balotelli was happy with that. He saw it as a thank you almost to Nice that they have over these 2 seasons really, I think, put life back into his career, which I think was at the risk of stagnating before this move. So he's a real success story. I, for one, was a bit dubious when he first joined. So to see him score regularly, to see him really mature, I think, over his 2 years, is full credit to Nice, but really full credit to Balotelli as well.
Yeah, it was just the right kind of move for him at the right kind of level to allow him to sort of step away from the spotlight for a change and not be really under the lampshade, as you may say, for a little bit and out of the scrutiny and out of the headlines briefly and sort of just concentrate on his football. But because I think he's been really good this season, and I think I agree with you, Rich. It was really terrific to see him sort of being goaded and not quite rise to it, but still have that Balotelli-ness about it. Of he had to say his piece, he had to talk to the referee. He still wanted to shake the hands of Thiago Silva, even though it was a little bit of a contentious. I'm not agreeing with you really, Thiago, but I'm not happy with what you're doing, but I'm not going to hit you this time. It was really nice to see, and the East side that really built off a solid start. They got that great goal for Allen Saint-Maximin. They caused a lot of problems in attacking areas. They didn't really let up on PSG, but yet, like you said, Peter, it was silly mistakes. Really, I remember in the first goal that Arnaud Souquet takes too much of a risk on a potential switch of possession, and he's caught so far up the field that Di Maria's given plenty of space, but it was almost like a bit of a get out of jail free for Paris Saint-Germain in the end, because they were a little bit lethargic again. They had their moments that admittedly Mbappe hit the bar, but Cavani didn't quite come to the races. The midfield didn't quite click with Draxler in there as well. He was a bit anonymous during this one after a pretty good game in midweek, but they just about clasped a nut together with that header to win the game and maintain their streak. But there's just still something missing there, isn't there?
Well, they're on the beach, aren't they now? I mean, they've Champions League was what their season was for. That's gone. Yeah, they've got the domestic cups, but you know they're going to win those at a cakewalk. It would seem. League seems pretty tied up. There's not a great deal for these players to really play for. Those that are at international level know that they're going to be going to the World Cup. It's not like there's any players there that maybe one or two, but the majority of those players don't really need to be up in their game to impress international selectors. So I think we're going to see performances like this, you know, in PSG's running. You know, there's no real. It's not the attitude to take. I know it's not the attitude to take, but those PSG players will be thinking, well, there's nothing to play for. You know, we've got everything that we need to be pretty much sewn up. Let's just, you know, relax and sort of, for want of a better phrase, sort of half-arse it till the end of the season.
It does certainly feel like that, doesn't it, Peter? That they're maybe a little bit on the beach. Does the manager motivate them anymore? Have they got any motivation really to put in massive performances? Because Draxler's probably thinking, well, my position's not necessarily tenable unless, or maybe a new manager might have a position for me, but otherwise he might be looking elsewhere in the summer. Di Maria was pretty good, but again, he might be someone that looks as this is an opportunity to really put himself in the shop window more than anything. Maybe it does seem now that they're just coasting towards maybe these cup finals and get those important ones out of the way, some more silverware and focus on the 2018-19 season now, doesn't it?
Yeah, like you were saying, there's too many transitionary circumstances surrounding the club now. It's what's going, what's coming, what is Emery going to be there? I think you could even label that some of PSG's performances throughout the season have only been, you know, second gear, and they haven't really needed to go above and beyond. But yeah, we're going to get these performances. I think they can wrap up the title against Saint Etienne if Monaco slip up twice, which probably won't happen. But I mean, they're pretty much home and hosed. I think from Khalafi's perspective, he'll want PSG to keep pushing. He's got to sell his TV rights deal. That's why we're seeing fixtures at 12 at lunchtime and that sort of thing, because you know there's still that side to it. But again, it's not like they're really thinking about impressing the next manager. It is in that sort of feeling of, well, we're going to get there and hope for the best. And it would be nice to say, oh, you know, World Cup form and whatever, but maybe that plays a part. I wouldn't say it totally is completely out the running. I mean, they'll be playing for places, I guess. The likes of Draxler will certainly be wanting to push. He'll most definitely be in the squad, you'd imagine, for Germany. But looking at that, getting a starting berth and that sort of thing was important. But I think, as Rich was saying, there are a number of players in that side who are guaranteed starts, really, especially your Cavani's and your Verratti's and so forth. So So yeah, we're going to see more of it until the end of the season.
As they sort of coast on and that's a Khalifi sort of focus on these trips to Brazil to potentially convince Neymar that he doesn't need £1 million a week salary, but if rumours are rumours for a reason. We won't dip too far into that one because that's a rabbit hole that we might not be able to claw ourselves out of. But moving on to another side that impressed this weekend and have improved recently, really, in Rennes, who sit in 5th position. We talked about them a couple of weeks ago, but after a couple of shakes from other teams, they're still the one in the driving seat, really. And again, Richie, you're probably not certain whether it's good to talk about your team or best if we ignored them, really. But it's been 6 games now. Their recent run unbeaten. They've drawn two of those. There's 4 wins in there against good sides like Lyon, and obviously the good win away to Bordeaux at the weekend that was partially gifted to them by an ex-player, which was nice to see in some ways. But I'm sure Bordeaux fans will think very differently. But a good stretch of form heading into the latter part of the season, where we obviously have the international break coming up ahead, so a chance for some of their players to rest. But they're certainly in pole position now for that 5th place and a Europa League spot.
I think they are. I mean, they've got a fairly tricky run in. First game back after the international break is at home to Monaco. Then they're away at Nice. Then 2 weeks later away at Nantes. Chuck in their penultimate game of the season away at PSG. Final game at home to Montpellier. You know, it's a tricky run in. It really is. So it's not a done deal. Yes, they're going into the international break in good form. Lamouchi has got the side playing pretty. I still think there's more to come from this team, but we're now starting to see a good level of consistency. I still think they're pretty slow out of the traps. It's a ridiculous number of goals that Rennes have scored have been in the second half. So I think they're still a little bit sluggish. I think there's work to do on that because, in the games against teams like Monaco, against teams like these, you can't afford to come out slowly. But I'm liking what I'm seeing. I, for one, was not overly encouraged when Lamouchi was announced as Christian Gourcuff's replacement earlier in the season. But I'm very, very pleasantly surprised. He's got a young team playing some really, really good football. There's some real standout players there. I genuinely think Thomas Kubek has been one of the signings and certainly one of the goalkeepers of the season. In Yoris Gnagnon and Jeremy Gerland, they've got 2 really talented young centre-backs. Ismail Assar looks to be over his injury problems. He's now scored, I think, 3 or 4 goals in that 6-game run. Obviously, Wabi Khazri is another one that could make a claim for signing of the season. They recruited fairly smartly in January. They brought in Biafra Sakho. He's yet to hit top form, but I think there's maybe a little bit of rustiness there. So there's a lot of reasons to be positive. This has been a very encouraging 6-game run, which sort of turned the season round because until that point, they were having a pretty torrid 2018. They just come off the back of losing at home to Guingamp. League game before that, they'd lost away at Dijon. So they weren't in a particularly good place. But I think because there's been a real struggling consistency with all of those teams in that run, that sort of 5th down to sort of 11th place, although in that pretty poor run of form, they've managed to keep track. All of a sudden, now they're the team that have now put together a run of good form. 6 games unbeaten. Not many other teams can rival that in that sort of block of teams. So there's a lot of work to do. In an ideal world, yes, I'd love to say, I think 5th place is fairly sewn up, but it is a very tricky run-in. I think those first 2 games back after the winter break will be a big indicator of, well, let's see how serious this Rennes side are of taking 5th place and with that a Europa League place. If they can come away from those 4 games unbeaten, ideally maybe with 4 points, then I think we can probably reconvene in those few weeks' time, and I could probably be a bit more positive about 5th place being sewn up.
Yeah, because you start looking at some of the competitors for that place. I mean, Nantes are still there, but they keep making mistakes. They've had a really bad 2018. They're still really hanging on to that form they had at the first half of the season that's keeping them in that position. Montpellier sort of drift from week to week. Sometimes they can be quite good. Sometimes, like the weekend, they were maybe a little bit unlucky against Dijon, but at the same time, it felt like one of those Montpellier performances. They seem to rise against the big teams and not quite rise to the occasion against the smaller teams. And you think Nice were on good form, but have a difficult loss, obviously, and this one and a couple of difficult games still left themselves and teams around them. So you think that it's really up for grabs for any of them, really, Peter. But it's been a good season, really, for Rennes after a couple of seasons where it's been a little bit indifferent more than anything. But Rich made a lot of good points there that their strikers started, like Sarr's starting to score goals. They're getting goals from everywhere. For like Kazri and Bourigeaud have both contributed quite a bit this season. But they just are finding a more cohesive unit with a good goalkeeper now, a solid defence, a serviceable midfield, and an okay attack. They've got the building blocks for what after this season, if they do make Europe and they have the summer ahead and they were willing to spend money last summer, they have the basis of what could be a more consistent European contender in French football.
Yeah, definitely. I think Rich has outlined it really well. I think the biggest thing for me about Rennes is balance. I think Lemouche settled on a side that feels a lot more stable. He's settled on Percic and Andre in midfield. They've looked good. And while Sakho's come in and not exactly set the world alight, but he's at least given them that focal point. And you look across the side now, you don't have Kazri playing up front and you don't have Sarr playing all over the place. I mean, you still have Ben Sabani at left back, but there is that sense that there's a more balanced and structured approach from Rennes. And I think that's helped, and it's that consistency that has helped them over this run of form. And I think when you look at the competitors as well, I mean, Nantes, it's taken them absolutely ages to fall out of fifth, and it's about time that they have done. And I think especially with them, we're starting to get a bit tetchy with Ranieri. He's come across as sort of, it's getting to him a little bit. There's always a fine line with the Ranieri side between the very good and the not so great, the mediocre, and that goes back to even Leicester and Chelsea and obviously Greece. But I think it's a low points tally this season, especially in that fifth place. I don't think we're going to get near the point size of last season, and it does leave it open. And as Rich was saying, if you can get that little run of form at the right time, then they can take advantage of it. Rennes, obviously, a disadvantage is their run, and I do think that is really, really tough. I do think they'll have to take a lot more points over the next four than you might think, just because they've got to play Toulouse and Strasbourg, both of which aren't safe. Strasbourg still need to push on, and so did Toulouse. So those two games could also be a stumbling block. But that said, we're looking at a Rennes team in really good form and against in a position in the league that has been quite open. But I certainly agree with the idea that they can build on this going into next season. They've got all the building blocks to do that. Obviously, their track record of developing players is superb, so you can't count against the next few coming from the academy as much as anything. But across the team, you look at the age. I mean, Gelin and Gnagnon are the perfect example. I mean, they're both so young, yet they are performing slowly a good partnership. I think there's still errors there, but that's developing nicely. You've got Bourigeaud on the right as well, and Sarr, of course, we haven't seen anywhere near what he can do yet. So there's a lot of potential in that side. And the only thing I have to say is, I guess it throws to you, Rich, is Ben Sabani really a left back now?
I'll give you something. I think he has improved. He's still, I would say, the weak link. I still think he's a bit of a walking penalty provider. And I think there's still question marks over his temperament. But he's improved. He's not a left back, and I will make that argument until I'm 6 feet under. But at the minute, he's probably the best that we've got with Ludovic Ball, who is I still think is a very good right back, who just seems to be having the most rotten luck with injury of late. It seems to be a case of make a comeback, and seemingly half an hour into that comeback, there's a recurrence of a former injury. So he'll do. It's an area I'd like to see looked at in the summer, along with perhaps a couple of other areas as well. But as you both said, I'm pleased with what looks like some real solid building blocks for what's to come.
Yeah, just don't sell them now is the important thing more than anything.
Well, interestingly, I did read today that they were potentially looking at bringing back Costile because there were several English clubs looking at Thomas Kubek. So there's going to be players that will take some interest. Nyanyon will, whether they can keep Kazri, of course. Again, midweek rumours suggest that he could go for as cheap as €4.5 million if Sunderland do get relegated, which seems to be on the cards. So I don't know whether that's good news or not for Rennes, because it puts him firmly in their price bracket, but obviously then brings into play so many other teams who will have seen how well he's got back to form.
Yeah, that's always a worry. Let's hope it went slightly under the radar how good he's been at Rennes, and hopefully that the fact that he has to go back to Sunderland beforehand, they might think that he might have contributed on their downfall again, and maybe we can only dream, can't we? Let's move on then to what is happening this week, which is the international break ahead of us. We've got 2 friendlies for France before the World Cup still, and that's against Colombia and Russia this week. 2 varying degrees of difficulty, you might say, in those 2 games, but some interesting call-ups, and we'll talk about them, the whole squad really more in depth, but during that weekend, because obviously we're getting closer and closer to the World Cup. But 2 new players to the setup, because although Kimpembe hasn't played for the national side before, he has been selected for the squad before, but the 2 new ones are both Spanish based, in Lucas Hernandez of Atletico Madrid, the left back and centre back as well, and Wissam Ben Yedder, the scourge of Manchester United, you might say, the Sevilla forward, who's had a good season, although he has dipped in and out with the Sevilla side, but maybe more because of Montella than his actual form himself. But Peter, 2 players that are interesting picks, especially the striker Ben Yedder, who obviously we've seen in Liga for a number of seasons do very well, and he has been performing well for Sevilla as well, but seems maybe a left field sort of choice. And also Lucas Hernandez, there is questions about those fullback positions, and with Luca Dean being the other selected left back on that one, it seems like an interesting chance for him to maybe put a marker down, given that Dean is not a regular starter by any stretch of the imagination really for Barcelona. What do you think to the 2 newcomers to the squad?
Sorry, Nathan, I just dropped out. What was that?
Yes. Sorry. So, what do you think to the newcomers into the squad? So, what Lucas Hernandez and Wissam Ben Yedder? What do you think they bring?
It's an opportunity for them. I mean, I guess the proximity to the World Cup counts against them a little bit. I think in Ben Yedder's case, there is an opportunity there. Lacazette is never a certainty with Deschamps. Is always, do I have to pick him sort of feel to it whenever he does appear. So, with him out, there's a chance. But I was a little surprised he was included. I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, he hasn't featured so much for Sevilla, especially in the league. More to do with Montella, as you were saying. But I think, his Champions League form has been exemplary, and against United, of course, we saw what he can offer. So, there's a chance there for him to really put some pressure on and give Deschamps something to think about as much as anything. Luca Hernandez, I think, is a different story. I think left back has been a position that Deschamps be looking at to think, well, what are my options here? Of course, Mendy's been out all season. There'll be a question of whether he can get back to good enough form to make it back into the squad. You'd imagine he will be able to. Cazava has been poor generally all season, both PSG defensively, not offensively, with his frequent super strikes. He chips in with every now and again. And obviously there's Luca Dean in there as well. So there's some selection choice. And I think Deschamps really does love a versatile player. That's why Benjamin Pavard is still in the squad, and because he can play across the back 4, and Luca Hernandez is a similar mould. And I think you could even put Ben Yedder into that he can move around on that front 3 as well, with something that's counted against the likes of Fekir in the past. So, there are opportunities there, of course there are, and when you're in that setup, but I guess it's a 2-week period, it's always tough, and there are a lot of other options that France have to call on, especially in forward areas. So it's always a tall order, but they're merited call-ups to an extent, and it'd be good to see what they can offer.
Yeah, it's a couple of interesting choices, really, Rich, given that obviously neither of them have really been in the setup before. Lucas Hernandez is only 22, so he's got plenty of time to sort of embed himself. When you think that also players like Kozawa and others at left back have been struggling with, obviously Mendy injured as well, and Wissam Ben Yedder, you think of the strikers that might be options. Kevin Gamero has been in and out at Athletic. Lacazette's obviously injured, so is Fekir. You think of maybe even Sebastian Haller, maybe he's a little bit too close to Giroud. So but Ben Yedder is more of that similar option to a Griezmann or someone that can play out wide, or if Lacazette or Fekir can't make it, he's maybe more of an option to their sort of style. So a good opportunity for both, and both probably will get a game, you would think, at least in these ties, really, and a chance for them to show what they're made of.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how they perform. Did I read in a journalist asked Deschamps if Ben Yedder hadn't have scored those 2 goals against Manchester United in the Champions League, would you have picked him? And perhaps not the ideal thing that Ben Yedder would have wanted to hear. Deschamps says possibly not. So it doesn't necessarily fill Ben Yedder with the biggest dose of confidence going into it. But I'm pleased to see he's finally been given a chance. You know, he was a regular scorer in Liga. He's gone to Spain and had decent success there. Obviously announced himself on a much wider stage with those 2 goals against Manchester United. So it's deserving. It's not the ideal time, as Peter mentioned, with the World Cup so close now. He's probably got 90 minutes over the course of these 2 games to prove, is he worth a punt from Deschamps? I just think there's going to be too much competition for him. Whether Fekir can come back from his latest knock, rediscover that form that we saw early in the season, maybe could be a replacement for Fekir, possibly. But there's a lot of competition in that forward area. I think Lucas Hernandez really emphasises how Kozawa has really not kicked on to the levels I think we all expected and hoped. Once he got that move to PSG, we all thought, right, he performed so well at Monaco. Let's kick on. Let's see, a world-class left back. And a couple of years or so later, and we've still not seen a world-class left back. It very much smacks of I'm going to need a backup in case, this is a Deschamps decision where he's thinking, I'm going to need a backup in case Benjamin Mendy doesn't get back to full fitness or is going to lack match sharpness going into that World Cup. I'm going to need a fresh player who has played a lot through the course of the season to come in and perform for me at the tournament. That's what this smacks of, as far as I'm concerned. So again, he'll have probably 90 minutes or so across the 2 games to impress. I think there's less pressure on him to perform at a much higher level than Ben Yedder. I think just for the lack of options, aside from Hernandez and Dean and Mendy and Kozawa, there's no one else, and Deschamps didn't really sound like Kozawa was, going to be with us, had a nailed-on position in that squad. So I think Lucas Hernandez has got a bigger opportunity than Ben Yedder to really make a World Cup claim over these 2 games. But I'm just looking forward to seeing some fresh faces in the squad.
Yeah, 2 interesting selections that they're kind of left field, really, out of anything. I mean, and we know Wissam Ben Yedder has been doing very well recently, but I never really expected him to get a French call-up, and it's nice to tie down Lucas Hernandez as well, with obviously having other nationalities looking at him and been performing well for Atletico. It'll be interesting to see what he can do as well. We're going to finish this week with our Liga and snapshots. We'll save the Playing for Russia for next week. We'll save that in our back pockets. We might have a few of those next week, but we'll do our Liga and snapshots, and I'll start with you, Peter. What's your Liga and snapshot this week?
My snapshot comes from the bottom of the table, and that's Toulouse and Strasbourg's absolute mental finish to the game, including 2 goals from Yaya Sanogo, which is probably the more crazy aspect. Although we keep saying that, and it's starting to wear off because he is chipping in every now and again, and the Bev's getting the best out of him. But yeah, as Strasbourg were leading up until the 89th minute, where Sanogo struck. He then struck again 60 seconds later to turn things on its head. And then just as you thought that, Toulouse had stole a win, Iago sticks it into his own net from a Kone header. So it finished 2-2, 3 goals in, well, almost as many minutes to round off a crazy finish, and a draw which both sides will probably be okay with, but both will be desperately looking to get those 3 points to try and pull away from the bottom, which is, especially for Strasbourg, I fear is looming very large.
Yeah, it's starting to hang over a couple of teams, isn't it? With those 2 draws in both those relegation fights, none of them really tried to separate themselves, which makes it entertaining but worrisome for all the more as well. Rich, what's your snapshot this week?
Mine's just a very, very brief one, and it was a sort of a reminiscing back to the good times for Bordeaux. They brought back for the Rennes game some of their sort of former great players from the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a couple from the Ligue 1 winning team from 2008. There was, I think, Paoletta and Cavagnai with the ceremonial kickoff. At the end of the game, Chamac was brought on and partnered up again with Gorku, who was obviously there in a playing capacity with Rennes, and got the winning goal as well. So it was sort of a reminder of just, you know, what top quality players Bordeaux have had in recent times, and a real emphasis, I suppose, on they're still a sleeping giant. You know, there's still a lot there, a lot of unfulfilled potential with that club. The stadium they've got, the heritage they've got. They really, really should be aiming a lot higher than they are. But with US investors supposedly looking at coming in, you know, maybe that's a sign things could change very soon.
Yeah, we can absolutely see that. My Ligue 1 snapshot goes to 2 strikers that are in excellent form at the moment, and are really one. Well, I think both in a way to different audiences at least are pulling up trees, shall we say, and that starts with Stefan Jovetic of Monaco, who's been in sensational form. If you've not been watching, he scored 6 goals in his last 5 games for them, and came off the bench at the weekend to grab the winner against Lille, where they seem to mire themselves for a long period of time and eventually snuck away with the win. But he's been really good. He's been creative. He almost set up a goal for Lamar in the second half as well, with a lovely outside of the boot attempt. He scored a wonderful little goal with a little delicate chip over the goalkeeper as well. He's been in really terrific form. A striker I've always quite liked. Even his Fiorentina days, he was great. I thought he was underappreciated at Man City and the same into Milan as well, but has really found some spark at form. Even though Falcao's even come back now, really you can't argue that Jovetic has to be the first name on the team sheet there, and one that Rich will obviously be very familiar with in Wesley Said, who's found a new lease of life really at Dijon. He scored 4 goals in his last 3 games himself. Has been a real nice foil to Tavares this season, and scored the 2 that helped earn a point at Saint-Etienne. He seems like a completely different player. It's absolutely crazy. You think of also like Nolan Roux, who's come into form, but Wesley Said looks quicker, he looks sharper, his finishing is much better. He just seems to have added an extra dimension to every part of his game, really. And it's great to see a player do that, where you really write off players that don't, especially strikers, when they do struggle to score goals. You think he goes to another team and you go, he might be able to score maybe 1 or 2 extra more, but you think that he's not quite really of a Ligue 1 level. But he's really proved us wrong this season, and credit to him and Dijon and management there in Dalio to bring that out of him and getting him scoring goals again. It's been really terrific to see. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Rich, Peter, and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show that will be no preview show with it being an international week. I apologise. Yeah, it's been a long while since we've done an international week, it feels like, at least anyway. So there'll be no preview show on Thursday because it is an international week. So that will return the following week, but we will have another main show for you on Monday. So do tune in to that next week. A bientôt and goodbye.